Hello everybody and welcome back to the second shelf and to another tops and flops video. For those of you who might not be familiar with this concept, at the end of the month or the beginning of the next month, this time it's the beginning because it's already the 3rd of November, I look back at my reading month and pick, the best and the worst of that reading month, tops and flops. And as always, we start with the tops, and in the tops category with the best reread of the month. As you know, I try to reread more, and you're probably not at all surprised if I tell you that the best reread of October was Emily Bronte's Wuthering Heights. I'm not gonna natter on about this book again, because I filmed a whole video about the Bronte sisters, which books I read from all three, and more in particular my love for Wuthering Heights. So if you're interested in my nattering, I will leave a link to the video about the Brontes and Wuthering Heights down below. You can check that out if you want. The book was a buddy read with Sean from Sean the Book Maniac, and it was a reread for him as well, and he loved it as well. So I will leave a link to his review video also down below. If you haven't watched it, go check it out. The only two things I want to say is I counted this book as a reread, even though I read it, I think, 2 times, maybe even 3 times, way back when I was in my early 20s, but I read it in German. So this was actually the first time that I read it in the original English, but I think it's fair that I still can count it as a reread. And the second thing that I want to say, I mean, you have gathered by now that I really love the book. It's not a romantic love story. People who expect a romantic love story tend to be disappointed when they read the book. It's a book about abuse, mainly for me at least, and how abuse that you suffer as a child perpetuate itself through the generation. And the very modern approach to themes like that I find very fascinating, and I love the language. And it's now 2 minutes, and that's quite enough about Wuthering Heights. If you want to see more, check out Sean's video or my video. The next category in the tops is always the book that surprised me the most. And for this one, I chose a novella which just came out, Becky Chambers' new book, To Be Taught If Fortunate. And I think it was released in August. Now, if you're reading sci-fi, this is a sci-fi. If I haven't said that, no, I haven't. So it's a sci-fi novella, 150 pages. And if you read sci-fi, you're probably familiar with Becky Chambers from her Wayfarer series, 3 books starting with The Long Journey to a Small Angry Planet. I could have chosen this book for the next category as well, a book I thought about the most, but it surprised me because it was quite different in a way from what I might have expected from Becky Chambers. I think if you read one of the Wayfarer books, you will agree with me that these books focus very much on character, whether it's human or non-human characters, but it's really centering around character and character development. And this book, To Be Taught If Fortunate, is much more focusing on ideas in a way. But let me tell you first, might be a good idea to tell you what the book is about. So we follow the story told from the point of view of Ariadne, who is an engineer in a spacecraft. The spacecraft came from Earth. We are way into the future, of course. The spacecraft came from Earth and traveled for 30 Earth years to explore planets beyond the solar system that have life. So exoplanets with life. And the book is told, Ariadne writes a report, so to say, to Earth, telling Earth about their findings. There are 3 other crew members, and those characters, it's not that the characters are cardboard by any means. So we have 4 characters, but the main the main drive of the book is the experience that these crew members have on 4 different exoplanets and the life that they find there. And it talks about, or Ariadne talks about, the difficulty not to leave too much of a footprint on these planets. They don't want to disturb the ecosystem there. They don't want to, alter life there. They just want to see. And the question is whether that's at all possible. And it also talks about the difficulty, to come to grips with what you find, what kind of alien life you find, because you don't even have the language to describe it. So you describe some creature as fish-like because it looks a bit like fish on Earth. So these kind of things really make you think. At least they make me think, and it's action packed still. So if you think, oh, book of ideas, boring, it's not. I mean, it's action packed because they go to these 4 planets and a lot of stuff happens there. But and the description, I have to say, the imagination, Becky Chambers' imagination about alien life is just wonderful. The various life forms she comes up with is extraordinary and really engaging. So it's not a boring book by any means. I didn't want to say that, but it's quite different from her previous books. And I read this as a buddy read with Chris from Chris' Bookish Cauldron, and he really enjoyed the book as well. And if you don't know Chris, you should definitely check out his channel because he reads contemporary general fiction, but also a lot of sci-fi and fantasy. So if you are mainly interested in these categories, sci-fi and fantasy, and you're not familiar with Chris, you should definitely check out his channel. And if you enjoy reading sci-fi that is intelligent, engaging, and offers you a lot to think about, then I can highly recommend Becky Chambers' Novella. And the last category in the tops is, I mentioned it before, the book that I thought about the most. And I said I could have picked Becky Chambers' Novella for that as well. But instead, I choose a book that really affected me, and that is Edna O'Brien's new novel, Girl, which came out in September of this year. This was a buddy read as well with Sharon from Sharon Go Forth. And we both loved the book. I wouldn't say enjoy. Come to that a little later because of the theme. If you're not familiar with Sharon, she's a relatively new booktuber, really lovely. I'll leave a link to her channel. Go check her out. Now, Edna O'Brien, if you follow me for any length of time, you know that I really love her work. Her previous book, The Little Red Chairs, about the aftermath of the Yugoslavian war, I thought was brilliant. Did I say she's an Irish writer, born in 1930? And a lot of her books focus on female experience. And you also know that I normally hate when there is a girl in the title, but this is appropriate because it is, in fact, about a girl, Mariam. She is, the book is set in Nigeria, northeast Nigeria, and Mariam is 13, 14 when she is captured by rebels. Boko Haram is not named, but it's clear that, the rebels are modeled after Boko Haram. So Mariam is captured, and then the story develops, tells us, that's why I didn't say enjoy the book because it's horrific. The experiences tells us about her experience in the rebel camp. She's raped and repeatedly, and then she's forced to marry one of the rebels. She is pregnant with a child. That's not a spoiler because the book is told in retrospect after Mariam is able to flee, trying to find her way home. And the brilliance of the book is not only that I feel that Edna O'Brien really captured the experience of Mariam, but that she didn't stop with when Mariam escapes. I mean, we all, we follow the news and then we read about these horrific stories that girls are captured in Nigeria, and then sometimes, if they are lucky, we read something about an escape or that they were freed or whatever, and then we think, oh, thank God, everything fine in the end. Well, it's not. And that's, I think, the central message of the book, that the journey doesn't stop once you escape the rebel camp. On the contrary, the main focus of the book is what happens to Mariam and how difficult it is to find her way back into society once she escapes. She is met with a suspicion. People don't know how to deal with her, especially because she has a child from one of the rebels. So the story is much more complicated after Miriam is able to escape than you might think. And I thought that was one of the brilliant things about the book. The writing is beautiful, and the way Mariam, because we are in Mariam's head all through the book, and we can really see how much she tries to suppress what happened to her. And we get only glimpses of how traumatized she is. She is never talking herself about I'm traumatized, but we see that when she interacts with people and we get the reaction of other people, how much how horrific her experience was, and how much it influenced, of course, her life, but will keep on influencing her life probably for the rest of her life. It's not an easy topic, but I would say Edna O'Brien strikes a really good balance between not sugarcoating anything, but still making it possible for us as a reader to continue reading, even though the events and everything that is described are horrific. So I thought it was a brilliant book, and I can certainly highly, highly recommend it. So these were my 3 top reads of October. On to the flops. And I have to say, it was a really good reading month, so I don't have a book to talk about that I thought was completely horrible or that angered me or irked me. But as always in a reading month, there were a couple of duds, books that were just not very good and disappointing. And the first one is a crime novel by Liv Constantine, The Last Time I Saw You, which came out earlier this year. Liv Constantine is the pen name for a writing duo, 2 sisters, Lynn and Valerie, American authors, and I really enjoyed their first novel, The Last Mrs. Parrish. I read it a couple of months ago, but it came out a year or 2 ago, I think last year or the year before. So I thought, the new book, but no. The book follows a very successful, rich, middle-aged woman, Dr. Kate English. She is the heiress to a huge fortune. She has a high-flying career. She is married to a good-looking husband, and she has a child, this kind of setting. And it all goes to shit, so to say, when Kate's mother, Lily, is brutally murdered in her home. And in the course of the investigation of the murder, it turns out that Kate herself is stalked, probably by the same person who murdered her mother. So we follow the investigation into the murder, but also the investigation into the stalking. Now, that is your, typical thriller mystery premise. Nothing wrong with it, but the plot is just a big mess. There is no, suspense building development in a real sense, because we have Kate, who is constantly on edge, and then she yells at her husband, and she yells at her child, and then she calms down, and then she yells again, and then she calms down again. So it's this constant up and down without really building a proper, suspense arc. I thought the characters were not really interesting or well developed. The solution in the end was, predictable in a way, but also quite, middle of the road kind of thing. Not it's not a horrible book. I read it in one or two sittings, and I was engaged enough to want to find out who is the murderer and who is the stalker. But it was just not well done, I thought. And that was a bit disappointment, especially after The Last Mrs. Parrish, the book I read previously from the same author duo, which was really good. But yeah, it was a bit of a dud. And the second book in the flops category is actually a book that came out in November. I think just on the 1st, or maybe it will come out on the 5th. But I read it as an ARC from Nat Galley, thank you very much. And I also mentioned the book in my November TBR. And because it was a disappointment, I wanted to get this review up in case you were thinking of reading the book. And that book is Emma Slowley's debut dystopian novel, Disaster's Children. Emma Slowley is an Australian author, or at least she's born in Australia, but is living now in the US. And the premise of the book really made me include it in my November TBR video, I think a week ago, or whenever I did that. It's in the near future, we are talking 2020, 2021. But it's a dystopian world because climate change has really taken a turn for the worst. We follow the story of a ranch in Oregon where there is a group of quite rich people living there, and they have been living since 9/11, trying to build a survivalist community, so to speak. The main character in the book is a 25-year-old woman, Marlo, who is the daughter of her parents are founders of this community in Oregon. And then the story develops from weird things start to happen, animals start to die, and Marlo starts to investigate what happened. Then there is a newcomer from the outside coming to join this community, and they're friends of hers who left the community with whom she communicates. The premise was good, but it's just really not going anywhere, or at least it feels as if the author wanted to go 10 different places with this story and couldn't really make up her mind where to go. The writing is not bad, but much too prominent, if you know what I mean. It's like the story and the characters are hidden behind an overly descriptive, convoluted language, and you have to sort of peel your way through that in order to find what this book is about. So it's one of these books that I thought an editor should have given the book a good, thorough spring cleaning, and also telling the author, focus on one aspect of your story and not going, left and right. And yeah, it's easy to read, but it was in the end really boring, I thought, and that is not what you want from a dystopian fiction. So I'm really sorry that I included this book in the November to be released list, but yeah, it's a debut novel. And as always with my TBR videos, the to be released videos, I haven't read the book, so I can only, judge it from the blurbs and whether it sounds interesting. But this one, I just can't recommend it. I'm sorry. Anyway, these were my tops and flops of October. Thank you very much for watching. I hope you've enjoyed it. As always, I'm looking forward to talking to you in the comments. If you read any of the books that I'm talking about, let me know what you thought, or whether you have, a fantastic read in October that you want to tell me, or a dud that you want to share. I'm always curious to know, and I'll see you all soon in the next one. Bye-bye.